Welcome to High Performance, the podcast featuring Josh, Phegan and Alexander Phillips. Alexander, today we've got a great session because we're going to talk about committed listings 3 months ahead. So this is about developing a signed pipeline rather than just having a list of hopes. And what I see a lot with agents is that, I go to talk about pipeline and they kind of reel off a few names and maybe some addresses on some people that they think might be coming to the market. But, they just say, I had an average month because the 5 people I thought were going to come to market, none of them came to market. And it really frustrates, I think, not only them, but it also frustrates me as a coach about, that they said that they've got this pipeline and then when it actually came to the crunch, no one was actually prepared to sign agency agreements. Now, at different times in the year, this is really important. And this is, certainly for things like spring, working well ahead of the curve on that. Certainly for times like the start of a new year, making sure that you work well ahead at a Christmas period to make sure that you've got those listings signed and committed. What are some of the tips and tricks that agents should be really thinking about to actually get commitment from owners, maybe 60, 90 days out from when they're actually going to be taking that property to the market? Are there any things that they could be doing that can actually really help that growth to occur?
Josh, there's so much that you can be doing, and this is something that I've been really focusing on with the guys in the office. It's really progressing clients and getting them thinking of selling when the best times are to sell, which also obviously helps you plan what your year looks like with making sure you've got the highest your best energy levels for when you've got the most amount of listings and when you're going away on holidays, and ensuring that when you do you're not on the tools and you're away and enjoying yourself, that you're not panicking about getting back to the office, you don't have any listings. Like, there's nothing worse than coming in and just saying, well, I've got nothing, I've just had a 20 grand holiday and I need to start finding some listings. If you've gone away and you've got 5 to come back to, well, that's going to manifest into obviously the next 5 or 10 listings, because you should be getting at least 1 or 2 off the back of each one of them. But I suppose what it does as well, like, if you do it at the right times of year, like you start December and November are one of our quietest months, where for a lot of people it's their busiest because of latter part of spring and the higher stock levels. But one, we know the prices aren't as strong then, and also the market can switch off. But we're focusing on next year. So if you're focused on next year 3 months in advance, well, you got to think what's going to happen for you for that first quarter of the new year. One, you're going to come back, recharge. You're going to have more stock on than any other agent. And all that does is actually set you up for the whole year, because you're just going to you're going to be ahead of everyone with the amount of people you meet, and you're going to have the best results because it's generally the strongest time of year. Then therefore that's just going to turn into the next 5 or 10 listings.
And so this is the big thing for people, is they just go, hang on a second, what are you doing here? Is that, you got to prospect well ahead of the curve, and you got to make sure that you do that really, really well. And I think that's been the secret to our business, as well as actually making sure that you got plenty of demand, and so that when you are actually in a position that you need to get the signed listings, that you've actually got plenty of people that want to go with you. And I would say to agents that you're just not thinking about the non-obvious things that allow people to be able to commit to you. So, Alex, what I'd love to do, I get that you wanted to do something in spring, and we're still a few months down the track from that, but I got to ask you this question. If I happened to meet a buyer today that wanted to buy the home, and they wanted to buy it with a longer settlement, what would you want me to do then? And so my question for you is that about when you sell or when you settle. The other thing too, Alex, is that when you do go live to the market, certainly here in New South Wales, one of the requirements is that we do have a copy of a contract of sale. And no matter when you go to sell, you're going to need one of those. And what I was wondering is that would it be possible for us to maybe speak to your solicitor, get a copy of that contract organised, because that may allow us the opportunity to at least review the drainage diagrams, see whether or not the actual zoning might allow for any residential redevelopment, or potentially for someone to do an upgrade or an extension to the home. And I'd just like to know that, specifically before we go live to market, so that we can make sure that we get the very best buyers through the home at that particular point in time. The other thing too, at this time of the year, the property's looking really great. There's plenty of green lawns and very lush gardens and all of those things. And I'm just thinking if we could at least get the photography completed, we're now in a position that should you, all of a sudden find a home you want to buy, that then, that we're going to try and find for you, that then you're in a position that you can hit the go button as quickly as possible. And also too, understanding that, and certainly in Alex, in your business, I see this a lot, where you would actually go to list a property, but there might be some minor renovations, they're going to be done on that home before it goes live to market. That could be painting, that could be, sanding all the floors, it might be new floor coverings, it might be a minor kitchen or maybe a bathroom renovation. Is that those things take time, and tradies are just not always available. So Mr. and Mrs. Owner, how can I help you with that? Just to make sure that we get the property positioned so that we can sell the lifestyle that's going to maximize the sale price. Alex, are those sorts of things the things that agents should be concentrating on, and are there any others to kind of help them to really get that commitment in the pipeline?
Josh, I think it's making sure that the owner almost feels obliged to be using you because of your communication, your rapport building, the anchors you've put in the coming months to obviously help them, come to market. And to give you an idea, it's now the 5th of May, and we've already signed up 2 properties for August auctions because we're obviously way ahead of where we are on the curve. But the reason why we've signed them up is we've been helping them for the last 6 months to obviously get their properties ready, and we just said, well, we need your commitment now because we're obviously coming up to the time of going on the market. And I think that the more you're obviously doing as an extra bit of service, which is really what's needed these days, to it's so competitive out there, you've got to stay at the top of the list because no doubt they're going to be speaking to other agents. There's other things you can be doing than the standard rule. We need to sign your paperwork and, just a standard sort of closing question. So it's a really crucial part of, I think, any agent's, new business.
I just think that, the competition's never been so great. But you know what? I like to work in a market where there is no competition because from the client's perspective, I've done everything I need to do in order to be able to go and win that business. And that's simple things like, Alex, based on what we've discussed today, how can I help you from here? Alex, what might the next steps be? When should we speak next? How could I be of service to you? And I think that great questions to actually set up that framework is going to help. But I would say to you, it's okay, you look well ahead of the curve and you got to be looking 60, 90 days down the track. If you move to the mindset where you do that, as opposed to being needy and desperate and needing a listing this week, then your entire business changes. And I see that a lot. I see agents that go, hey, Josh, I need a listing this week. And I kind of feel like saying, you know what? And in the last 7 years that I've coached you, I don't think that conversation's ever changed. And what I'm getting at is that a reoccurring problem actually needs a reoccurring solution. So who are the people and what's your way? And most of it is that, in my belief, I reckon that people put people into a database and then lose them in the database. As opposed to saying, okay, cool, why don't you have a pipeline review meeting where for 30 minutes every week, you stop, collaborate, and listen, and you go through your entire pipeline on what you can do to bring those people to the market. And Alex, we've been working on this inside of your team with your agents that are working inside of your specific team about just making sure they got the pipeline. What have you learned in going through that process with them?
That obviously they've got a pipeline, but they're not understanding on what the trigger point is for that person to come to market, and they're not progressing them. So it's working out, what you can do to make sure they're coming on now, not in 6 months' time. So they're having probably soft conversations, not hard conversations around, digging deep and asking detailed questions that you get an understanding of what's holding them back from getting it on now and trying to get them to put it on the market.
And I was just thinking about this is that, don't misread the signals. They're either coming with you or they're not. And don't be in a position, oh, no, they might. Actually start counting the deals that are real. And the way that you do that is agency agreements. So stay focused, work 3 months ahead of the curve, get the listing signed, and you're going to have a great business.